Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. My name is Paul Golin. I am Executive Director of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. And if you don't know, the Society for Humanistic Judaism is the umbrella organizing body for the Humanistic Judaism movement. And we have 28 affiliated communities in the United States and Canada. The city congregation here in New York is one of them. If you're a member at the city congregation, you're also a member of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. If you are not aware of that or not getting our magazine or emails, please be in touch because you are entitled to, and hopefully you will enjoy them. Today, I'm going to talk about what I think of when I think about the future of humanistic Judaism. And hopefully you can see the screen that I'm sharing with you all. It's a PowerPoint. And there's a lot that I think about. I'm going to try to distill it as best as I can and leave room at the end for questions. So if you have a question, if you think of something you want to ask or respond to, please save it until the end, because I'm going to try my best to leave as much time as possible. But I will say, first of all, thank you to City Congregation for having me and for that service. And really, standing on one foot, to me, the future is exactly what we just experienced in some ways, which was meaningful words, beautiful music, and most of all, empathy and connection between one another. And that's the short story, but now I have a whole PowerPoint I need to show you. So I am optimistic about humanistic Judaism as a philosophy, as a way of life, as something that provides meaning to people. And we have to acknowledge what's happening in the world today. To me, obviously, coronavirus is not a good thing. And yet, what I see happening in some ways is a confirmation of my worldview. I don't know if you have also seen what I've seen in terms of, there have been articles. There was one recently, I believe in the Times, about where is God during a pandemic, and all these clergy weigh in. And many folks are struggling with it, in part because, everyone seems to be suffering equally or randomly, as opposed to, the worshipers of our God being spared. And so to me, it kind of confirms that life is about, can be, the answers that we're seeking in life can be found through a scientific method. I think our salvation is not going to come from a supernatural source. Our salvation is going to come from people, smart people who are working on a vaccine, hopefully, as we speak. So in some ways, my worldview is strengthened by what I see around me and by, the work that people are doing to try to make the world a better place. So what I want to start with is the present. Besides coronavirus, which is relatively new, there have been two major trends affecting North American Jewry over the past several decades that I want to dive into, that I want to elaborate on a little bit, because to me, they are the springboards upon which we're going to move forward. And the first is intermarriage. And what I mean by intermarriage is when somebody who is Jewish partners or marries somebody who is not Jewish. And secularity. And what I don't mean by secularity is what it is often referred to by other segments in the Jewish community, which is assimilation. I don't think of what happened to Jews in America as assimilation. I don't buy that word, at least not the way I define assimilation. To me, assimilation means when a people behave so much like, when a minority behaves so much like the majority that they get absorbed into the majority to a point where they are indistinguishable from that majority. That hasn't happened to Jews in America. Jews in America did not become so much like other Americans that we became Christians. America is still today overwhelmingly Christian, and Jews, even Jews who became secular, did not become Christian, have retained aspects of their Jewish identity, even if they are not religious, not participating in organized Jewish life. So it's important. I'll get into secularity, obviously, but it's important for me to state that I don't see assimilation as one of the trends the way so many people in the organized Jewish community point to it. I think they may actually be misinterpreting secularity. And when I mention intermarriage, if you're new to our community, you may brace yourself when you hear the word intermarriage from somebody who is a Jewish communal professional for a shoe to drop about intermarriage. So I will let you know, there is no shoe. I will say intermarriage is good, period. That is a statement that only secular humanistic Judaism can say as a denomination. There are strings attached in all other Jewish denominations, and Reform, Reconstructionist Judaism have done a really great job in pivoting toward being more welcoming and inclusive toward intermarried families, toward changing the American Jewish understanding of who's a Jew, and yet they maintain barriers to participation. They maintain strings about who can and can't do certain things within their ritual practice that doesn't exist in humanistic Judaism. So you can relax about me being positive about intermarriage, and I'll go deeper on that. But first, let's ask ourselves, just how big is this? You may have been hearing a lot about intermarriage if you've been involved in Jewish community for many decades, but the organized Jewish community rarely talks about the results of an intermarriage rate. And even when there was a major study of American Jews done in 2013, which is starting to age, but is still the most recent and best survey of American Jews, they did not flat out say how many intermarried households are there compared to how many in-married households there are. I had to interpret the numbers myself. I did, based on total number of married households and then applying the intermarriage rate to the total number. It was not advanced math. I will not take credit for doing something that a sixth grader couldn't. And yet it wasn't included in the Pew survey and it wasn't discussed elsewhere in the Jewish community. So I went ahead and found the numbers myself. I ran it by the lead investigator of who did the Pew survey. He said that my methodology was correct. He didn't feel comfortable applying my methodology to their numbers, but he didn't dispute it. The point is, there are significantly more intermarried households in America today than there are in-married households. And again, intermarried means one Jewish partner or spouse, one partner or spouse who's not Jewish, and in-married is a two Jewish partnered household. This is not the impression you would get by being part of the organized Jewish community beyond our movement in other synagogue or temple communities. And this is going to continue to grow as a ratio that Pac-Man is basically going to close his mouth more and more, because the current intermarriage rate is over 50%. And this is hard to fully comprehend because, again, it's math, but I'll try to be clear and simple about it as possible. I don't know if you can see me on your screen as well, but if you can, I'm holding up 4 fingers. And so let's break down the math really easily. If you've got a 50% intermarriage rate, which is around the rate that has been reported for the Jewish community for 30 or more years now, 50% means that half or 2 of these Jews, all 4 of my fingers are Jews, and 2 of them marry each other, and 2 of them marry people who are not Jewish. Now, how many households are created? Well, the 2 Jews who married each other created 1 household. The 2 Jews who married people who aren't Jewish created 2 households. So you now have a ratio of 2 to 1. So what we've been hearing for 30 years about intermarriage in America is that it's half the Jews are intermarrying. But really what it means is double the number of intermarried households have been created over the past 30 years compared to in-married households. What also happened, which is never really, certainly wasn't expected and is not really discussed in the organized Jewish community, is how many of those households raise their children Jewish or with some Jewish identity. Now, we can get into a bit how Pew determine Jewish by religion. You can see this pie chart, Jewish by religion, 20%, partly Jewish by religion, 25%, Jewish not by religion or mixed, 16%, and not Jewish, 39%. This is how intermarried households raise their children. But to me, I combine those three pie pieces that add up to 61%. More than half of the intermarried are raising their children with a Jewish identity, because to me, obviously, I consider people Jewish even if they're not raised religiously Jewish. So the results of this is that among the actual children of intermarriage, so this was a question only for people who have one Jewish parent and one parent who is not Jewish, the percentage who consider themselves Jewish has been increasing dramatically over the generations. So the bottom line shows people 65 or older who only have one Jewish parent, and only a quarter of them consider themselves Jewish. And then you jump forward to the second to the top line, age 18 to 29, and a majority of them identify as Jewish. And that is in direct contradiction to what the organized Jewish community was predicting would happen with the rise of intermarriage. So as intermarriage exploded in America, a huge percentage of those intermarried families continued to provide a Jewish identity to their kids. And again, I want to give credit, the Reform movement and the Reconstructionist movement played a significant role in helping to encourage families, intermarried families, to raise their kids Jewish, and as did obviously Humanistic Judaism. But this is not what was expected. And the language that was used for decades was crisis, that there was an intermarriage crisis, there was a continuity crisis, and it didn't happen. It's not an intermarriage crisis. And in fact, this same study found that there were 6.7 million Jews in America, which is more than at any time in US history. And the study itself said that this was in part because the intermarried are raising their kids as Jews. Of course, the inevitable knock, what kind of Jews are they, right? So obviously, a significant segment of the Jewish community will not consider someone Jewish if their father is Jewish and their mother is not, for example. And obviously, Humanistic Judaism is not one of those sectors of the Jewish community, but that is one big barrier to inclusion. But there's a lot more judging going on than just that, in terms of how Jews behave and what they do, how they identify themselves in terms of connection to Jewish community, Israel, and so on. And sadly, I feel the judgmental piece of it has pushed so many people away. And it's really one of the worst things that Jews do to one another is judge folks on what kind of Jews they are. So traditionally, what was the approach to intermarriage by the organized Jewish community? I hope most of you know who this guy is. Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof. He made exceptions for all of his daughters until the last one who intermarried, and then there is no other hand, you're out. That hasn't been the Jewish communal response in many, many decades, but there's trace elements still in our community of this approach. As recently as a couple of years back, we continue to see articles of attack on intermarriage. And this is from an author who a decade before was saying, which of our children will be Jewish in this age of intermarriage? Pew showed the intermarried are raising their kids Jewish at much higher rates than anyone was expecting. So they moved the goalpost, right? So now it's not that your kids won't be Jewish, it's that your grandkids won't be Jewish. This will go on forever from a segment, but overwhelmingly now the approach has changed. What hasn't changed, or what the bigger challenge is for the Jewish community, is what matters to intermarried families and Jews in general. So one of the questions they asked Jews was, what's essential to being Jewish? And to me, this was the most important question on the whole survey, because only 28% of all Jews, not just intermarried Jews, of all Jews said being part of a Jewish community is essential to being Jewish. Only 28%. To me, that should have been the alarm for the organized Jewish community. Forget the intermarried, one way or the other. You're not essential to Jews. And that is really relevant, not just to the parts of the organized Jewish community that aren't as welcoming as we are. It's still relevant to humanistic Judaism as well. We have to make the case for being part of organized Jewish life as essential to being Jewish. There were some other interesting answers on this list. So the top scorer was remembering the Holocaust at 73%. Having a good sense of humor came in at 42%, which is, I'm pretty glad to see it on the list. And caring about Israel was only 1 percentage point higher than having a good sense of humor. Again, the organized Jewish community, if you're an observer or participant, you would presume many more than 43% of American Jews care about Israel and feel like it's essential to care about Israel. That wasn't the case. So what's happening? What's going away? And it's only going away for half or more of us, not for everybody. Lots of folks are still in a mode of Jewish expression that is recognizable to past generations as well. But Jewish ethnicity and tribalism is going away. Fixed denominational identities is going away, or joiners. I presume if we took a poll of folks on this webinar and asked how many people, this is humanistic Judaism, how many people grew up in humanistic Judaism, it would be almost none of us. And so we, even in this conversation, have switched denominational identities. Jewish religiosity, which we'll get into, this notion that morality is based on what God says, and therefore Jewish obligation is going away. The notion that Jews should do stuff, Jews should belong to a temple because that's what Jews do. That is going away. That's an idea that younger generations no longer cling to. And intermarriage is accelerating all of these changes. So if you've got 2 or more heritages in your household, the notion that you should be loyal to just one of them seems contradictory, seems like something you wouldn't want to do. And when you have access to multiple religious traditions, it calls all of them into question, which is why overwhelmingly intermarried households are also secular. And among those folks as well, the case for particularism over universalism is harder to make. And again, all of these challenges in some ways touch on what we do in humanistic Judaism, which is why I want us to be aware of them. We're still making a case for particularism, even as many of us, myself included, maybe 50% or more, a universalist. There are still things we're doing that are particular to being Jewish. So what I propose is a new agenda for the Jewish community. The idea of trying to make them, the intermarried, become more like us, the insiders of the Jewish community, is something that we should let go of. And we can acknowledge that the we, all of us in the Jewish community, is changed forever, and changed forever in large part by this rise of intermarriage. And of course, intermarriage was driven by many other societal factors as well. This was not always my approach, and I've been working on the issue of Jewish intermarriage for 20 years. And when I came into it, I really did think, if we can get the intermarried, and by the way, I'm intermarried, so when I say the intermarried, I'm talking about me too. If we can get them to behave more like Jews who are married to other Jews, right? Just do all the things that the in-married are doing, then we'll have growth of Jewish communal population and everything will be all right. And I recognize now that wasn't the right approach. Intermarriage changes Judaism, but Judaism was gonna change. And a question I've put to many audiences is, if you're Jewish, certainly if you're not Jewish, but if you're Jewish, do you express your Jewish identity in the same way that your grandparents did? And I've had 3 hands go up in a room of 70 Jewish communal professionals. Most of us do not express our Jewish identity the way our grandparents did, and that's okay. But then why would we hope our grandkids express their Jewish identity the same way we do? They're not going to. So we have to recognize that and do what we can to give them the tools to create a meaningful Jewish community for themselves. So to me, to answer this question of the Jewish future or the humanistic Jewish future, it's sharing what's positive and beneficial about today's multicultural narrative. So this was my wedding 15 years ago and 20 pounds ago. And this is my ketubah, my wedding contract, and I hope you can make this out. There's 3 languages on it. It's Hebrew, Japanese, and English. My wife is from Japan, and I'm very interested in any convergence between Jewish and Japanese, and I'm the administrator on Facebook of the Japanese page. Feel free to like it. Anytime there's a regular convergence of things Jewish and things Japanese, I throw it up there. There's now, I think, 1,600 followers of that Facebook page. I can tell you confidently that there are more Jews married to Japanese people today than at any time in history. It's still a tiny percentage, but more than ever. These are my in-laws during our hora, and to me, it's just the perfect encapsulation of Japanese. As lovely and expensive as my wife's wedding dress was, the most expensive garment at my wedding was my mother-in-law's kimono. And I won't tell you how much it was, but it's ridiculous, but beautiful. And these are my kids, and this is the real reason I do PowerPoints, is just to make you look at my kids. But this is Japanese. And so I'm interested in how do we merge this, and why do we merge this? And to me, there is no conflict between doing Jewish, doing Japanese, being Japanese, because this isn't religion on either side. This is culture. And as we'll get into, culture is a zero-sum game. There is no conflict here. You don't have to choose one over the other. The only limitation is how much time you have in a day. So in the future and today, starting today, let's celebrate diversity, not a zero-sum game. The only limit is how much time in the day. Humanistic Judaism should be in an advantageous position here because we have no barriers to identifying as a humanistic Jew and participating. So my question is, and I don't have an answer for this necessarily, is what would more hybridization look like? And what is the role for humanistic Judaism and for our communities? City congregation, which I'm a member of, is here in New York City where I live. There's an amazing facility called Japan Society. I look at their board list because that's what I do, because I'm a Jewish communal professional. There's so many Jewish names on the board member list of the Japan Society. There's a great opportunity here for us to approach them and say, let's do something around Japanese and an event, a celebration, and there's no downside. And we should be in the vanguard of people who recognize that. And at the same time, we need to be sensitized. We need to make sure all of our folks are sensitized that, for example, no one should say to my kids, funny, you don't look Jewish. That is a laugh line that's no longer funny, and it's hurtful. It has been hurtful to many people. It's not cute. We need to get past it. There's never been one right way to look Jewish, but particularly today, there isn't, and those kind of things can really push people away. So there is still a degree of sensitivity. I'd like to think humanistic Jews are ahead of the curve on it. I'm not sure. Secularity, the other big trend I want to talk about tonight. I did a presentation at Limud, which is a Jewish learning gathering up in Boston called There Is No God and I'm Still Jewish. They put me in a relatively smallish room. People had to pull chairs in from other rooms to come talk about this. This is a powerful idea. And this is from the Pew survey. And so what you have here is the percentage of people who don't believe in God. And the way they got to this was asking 2 questions. The first question was yes or no, do you believe in God? And 28%, see the 28% all the way to the right on the first line, 28% of Jewish Americans answered Pew, no, flat out, no, I don't believe in God. That's compared to only 9% of all Americans who would answer no. So then the next question was, how certain are you in your belief in God? And then let's go all the way back to the left column, absolutely certain. Only 34% of American Jews said they're absolutely certain in their belief in God. And I say only 34 because, again, compared to most Americans, 69% of Americans are certain about their belief in God. I find that terrifying, just to be honest. There's this big middle, of course, about folks who are fairly certain. 24% of Jews are fairly certain about their belief in God. 10% are not too certain, 3% not at all certain. If you know sociology, this is a Likert scale, and basically not too certain, not at all certain, it's still kind of a no. I push them over or let's call them agnostic. So between atheist and agnostic, you've got 40% of American Jewry. That's remarkable. And it's very different than Americans in general, but it's on the vanguard. It's not, and I'll show you a graph about that in a moment. But Jews of no religion is a category that Pew created also based on a two-question setup. The first question was, they would call people at random and say, what's your religion? And when people say Jewish, they are Jews by religion. Now, if I got a call and someone said, would you take a poll? And I said, yes. And they say, what's your religion? I would say Jewish. And then I would hope to have the opportunity to say, no, I don't believe in God. But I would say Jewish is my religion, and humanistic Judaism is a religion. I think many of us would fall into this Jews by religion category. However, for the people who said no religion, or I'm not affiliated with any religion, Pew then asked, do you have any Jewish ancestry? And the people who said, yeah, my dad is Jewish, or my mom is Jewish, those are Jews of no religion, and they continue to be asked questions. So again, when you look at the generational change from oldest to youngest, this percentage of Jews of no religion, this is a dramatic increase from only 7% of the greatest generation to 32% of millennials. And of course, they only asked people who are age 18 and above. And we can presume that this percentage is continuing to rise. Jews of no religion, they have some connection to Judaism, but they don't identify themselves religiously as Jewish. And I feel like that is growth potential. Because most Jews agree that Judaism is more about ancestry or culture than it is about religion. And that's true even for Jews by religion. More than half, 55% of Jews by religion would say being Jewish is mainly a matter of ancestry and culture. And now they may not be defining Judaism as a culture the way Rabbi Sherwin Wein did when he founded Humanistic Judaism. But again, there's opportunity here. And as I mentioned, this is an American trend. This is a percentage of the percentage of Americans who answer that Pew survey of no, I'm not affiliated with any religion, has again been on a dramatic increase where it's now at a quarter of all Americans. And among younger Americans, it's a third. Doesn't mean they call themselves atheists, agnostic, free thinkers, humanists. Many of them still believe in some kind of supernatural, but they're not affiliating with organized Jewish community. And the reason why, again, I want to retain our opportunities with these segments is because of our ability to allow people to self-identify. This is what secular humanistic Judaism as a movement uses to define who's a Jew. This challenging question for so many people who are working and organizing and volunteering in the Jewish community. Who do we include and who don't we include? And in humanistic Judaism, we include people of Jewish descent or a person who declares himself or herself to be Jewish, and who identifies with the history, ethics, values, culture, civilization, etc. And their friends and family members and allies, anybody who wants to participate. There is no delineation between who can stand on the bima, right? Most of our communities don't have a bima, right, a stage. Who can read from the Torah? Most of our communities are not reading from the Torah, but if we were, and you can read from the Torah and you're not Jewish, have a go. So that kind of ability to be flexible. And of course, it's because we're not approaching Judaism as a religion, even though we are a non-theistic religion. That's a whole separate webinar. So when I think about moving forward, I ask, what if we place meaning over identity, right? So much of the organized Jewish community has been about strengthening Jewish identity, as if identity is something you're born with or born into. It's in your genes, and all we as a Jewish community need to do is strengthen that. That strategy has failed, I think, in most cases, not all cases. To me, it's about, what does Judaism do for you? What does Jewish community do for you? How does it work? And if we have answers for that, why couldn't we provide that to anybody who's looking? So when I think about how can I spend my time, what should I do with my time? I'm asking myself the following questions. How does it improve my life? How does it improve my family's life? And or how does it help me make the world a better place? Everything we do as a movement should be parsed through these questions, and we should have concrete answers that we can share with people. Because in the future, everyone can be anything that they want to be. And actually, Danny mentioned a VR headset, and maybe if you had no idea what he was talking about, this is what it looks like currently. Hopefully, it will get much less heavy. I have one of them too. It's like wearing 6 pounds on your face. After like an hour, hour and a half, it starts to really bother you. But in the meantime, it's pretty amazing. It puts you in a different world. You can be who you want to be, and you have unlimited choices in some ways. So if that's the case, why would anyone do anything Jewish? What do they get out of it? Why would they do humanistic Judaism? What would they get out of it? How do we make that case? How do we make it accessible to anyone who wants it? And who's going to curate it? And by that, I mean, we know, if you're on this call, you know about the meaning of humanistic Judaism. You've been touched by the meaning of humanistic Judaism in some way, and you want more of it. But how do we share that? How do we get that to more people? Obviously, we've been doing it in different ways for over 50 years. Our movement is over 50 years old. But how do we do it today? How do we do it in the 21st century? How do we go to where people are or where they're at? So in this virtual reality world, there is a church already. Someone set up a church in virtual reality. Should we be the first Jewish denomination to have a humanistic temple in a virtual reality world? I don't even know the right terminology. And in a lot of ways, the future is already here. So I mentioned about denomination switching. About half of all American adults have changed their religious affiliation at least once during their lives. And of course, the Pew Research Center considers like Protestantism and Catholicism different religions. From a Jewish perspective, we may look at it all as Christianity. They identify it as different religions. About half of all Americans have switched at some point in their lives, which is remarkable. And it shows that future already exists. People can pick and choose what they want from all sources, from all wisdom traditions. So if humanistic Judaism is a wisdom tradition, how do we get it out there? How do we share it with people? And how do we lower the barriers as far as what the requirements are? City Congregation invited whoever wants to come tonight to come. And we do have some folks who are newcomers who said this is their first ever humanistic Jewish event or service. And that's great. And we need so much more of that. Judaism is already doing this in some ways. It already competes in the marketplace of ideas. Every 2 years or so, the New York Times will do an article about some Jewish ritual that non-Jews are doing, and not just non-Jews like married to Jews, but I mean just people who aren't Jewish at all. So you can see this article here. There was an article on the left, people in New York move apartments and leave their mezuzahs up. And the Times went around interviewing other people about why did you leave that mezuzah on your doorpost if no one in your household is Jewish? And they got some interesting answers, but it provided some kind of meaning to those folks. Likewise, the second article is about signing a ketubah, the traditional wedding contract. Neither partner is Jewish, and yet they wanted a ketubah. We've heard this about the chuppah as well, the wedding canopy. We've heard this about the tradition of breaking a glass right after you get married, and others. There was another article about families that wanted their kids to have a bar bat mitzvah, even though nobody in the family is Jewish, but they went to a bar bat mitzvah and they said, this is meaningful and we want this. And of course, Madonna somehow embraced aspects of Judaism, and people at that time were furious. They said, no, that's ours. And I was psyched, because I like Madonna, and I was just excited that she thought there was something cool about us. So it's out there already, and we should put it out there even further. And to me, that's the mission I'm on. Bringing meaning is the mission, and it's a cause, because I'm asking you to support us in this mission, right? That's how causes work. And you do support us, those of you who are members in a community. So often membership in a community is this thought of, well, I want something, so I'm going to pay these people and they're going to provide that thing for me. And that is a model that has sustained Jewish synagogues for 100 years, certainly 60 plus years as suburban synagogue communities. It's a fee for service model in a way. And then if it works, people feel like they're part of a community. But really, it's like, you pay us, we'll provide community to you. And that has been breaking down in all the denominations. And instead, I see more of a cause-based model, which is come to us and help us make meaning. If this is meaningful for you, join with us to provide it to more people. Help us find the resources to provide it to more people. So it's not that we're necessarily changing the language or anything that we do as far as humanistic Judaism, but really it's a repositioning, a rethinking of how we go about inviting people in to share this with us. It has to improve people's lives. It has to be based on what do we want to see more of in the world? Do we want to see more secular expressions of Jewish identity? Do we want to see more secularity? I certainly do. And how do we advocate for it or act on it? We are in the process of thinking about our marketing and our branding. And most importantly, perhaps, is what can we provide that nobody else can? And I do think humanistic Judaism certainly provides something unique, and I hope that folks saw that to some degree in the service earlier tonight. So to me, that's the cause, and I'm trying my best to explain it. So mission is humanistic Judaism. Community is great, holiday celebration is great, life cycle events are great, youth and adult learning is great, cultural expression is great. That's all great. Everyone says they do that, whether they do it well or not, reform, conservative, recon, they're all doing these things. What they're not doing it as is humanistic Judaism. They're not doing it non-theistically. That's the difference. This is meaningful Jewish living without God. And we need to say it, I think, a little more brashly, a little more boldly. We need to articulate why it is we do it. The meaningful Jewish living is the positive. We're leading with the positive, but there's news here. And the news is we believe in humanism. We don't believe in the supernatural. And that is the difference. And all of these other things, which are great, we do, and we do well, but we also have to let people know the difference. So city congregation, for example, the only voice in New York City advocating for Jewish secularity. And to use language from other marginalized populations, because we have been marginalized. Non-theistic Jews have been marginalized, not nearly as badly as many other people who take priority, especially today. But humanistic Judaism was created as a safe space long before that language was being used for Jews to be openly non-theistic and Jewish at the same time. And I would argue that's a cause worth supporting and certainly worth being involved in as a community. But I'm trying to help people understand that it's not just a modeled on a synagogue community, but it's also a cause that we want to push forward in the world and let more people know about. I certainly know when I was growing up, I wish I had known about humanistic Judaism. It would have made such a big difference in my life, and I think the life of my family, if we had had these options when I was growing up, because I knew how I believed by age 11. And I didn't know that this existed. And I don't want whoever that 11-year-old is out there today who is struggling in traditional Jewish settings not to know that there's an alternative. So that's what drives me. That's the mission that I'm on. I hope some of this was meaningful to you as well.